Less than 5 days after announcing the shocking news that Dale Earnhardt had died as the result of his accident at the end of the Daytona 500, Mike Helton took part in another press conference, this one at Rockingham. Daytona, Helton's news, of course, brought about great mourning. Earnhardt was a 7-time champion and had enjoyed indescribable devotion and popularity. Still, the sport had been through hell the year before with the losses of Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin, and Tony Roper. Grief had become an all too familiar emotion in NASCAR. It was all kindling for the fury that would be unleashed by Helton's announcement at Rockingham.
What we have found in investigating Dale Earnhardt's car from the Sunday accident is that there was a broken left lap belt. The seat belt from the left side of the lap belts came apart. We don't know why, we don't know how, we don't know when yet. All we know is that there was a broken belt at this point.
Immediately, questions started flying. What caused the belt to separate? What role did it play in Earnhardt's injuries? Had it been cut by paramedics? Was it all a lie? The broken belt, combined with the thick veil of doubt over safety that was already hanging over the sport, sparked controversies and conspiracies that seemed to pile up one right after the other in the spring and summer of 2001. It was all a nightmare, and it was impossible to wake up and end the misery. It was far and away the darkest period of controversy the sport had ever known. 2311, Front Row, Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin, and NASCAR, that all boiled down to money. The years 2000 and 2001, people were dying. There were several extraordinary feel-good moments in the months following Dale Earnhardt's accident. Budding star Steve Park winning at Rockingham. Rookie Kevin Harvick beating Jeff Gordon by inches at Atlanta. Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Michael Waltrip in the Pepsi 400 in that summer's Daytona event. Dale Jr. again in the fall at Dover. Here's the thing. Those victories were special because of unspeakable tragedy. Park drove a car owned by Dale Earnhardt Incorporated in the very next race after the Daytona 500. Harvick drove the car vacated by Earnhardt and fielded by Richard Childress Racing. Dale Jr. was Earnhardt's son. Waltrip had seen his first Winston Cup win forever overshadowed by Earnhardt's accident, and this was the first Winston Cup event at Daytona following Dale Sr.'s accident. Dover, Dale Jr. won in NASCAR's return to action following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. After dropping the bombshell about the torn belt back in February at Rockingham, Mike Helton had refused to name the company that had produced it. When Winston Cup director Gary Nelson showed an example of a belt, its manufacturer label was missing. Still, as mysteries go, the case was easy enough to solve. Literally thousands of photos, not to mention video, existed showing Earnhardt strapped into his car by belts with huge red and white labels from Simpson Race Products clearly visible. Bill Simpson, one of the most significant figures in the history of motorsport safety, owned the company. Earnhardt's seatbelts, his open-face helmet, his fire suit, and his shoes were all Simpsons. Reporters fanned out in the garage following the announcement, looking for comments. Rusty Wallace did not disappoint.
One thing you all need to understand is that there was not a problem with the seatbelt. I think there was probably a bigger problem with the way it maybe was in the car, or maybe the way Dale wanted it, or whatever. You know, it ultimately seatbelt failed, no doubt about that. But I don't think you can say that it was the seatbelt's fault. Now, you need to talk to everybody else except that, but I kind of heard about it a little bit, and evidently there was a little bit more to the story, and I feel really comfortable with my seatbelts. I have no problem with my seatbelts.
Later that day, Bill Simpson issued a statement. It is very distressing to lose a good friend and great competitor like Dale Earnhardt. It was also distressing to hear this morning that a seatbelt that we produced came apart during his fatal crash. Having tested and produced seatbelts for the motorsports industry for more than 43 years, we have never seen a seatbelt come apart in the manner that occurred. Our seatbelts, when properly installed, won't fail. That last sentence, our seatbelts, when properly installed, won't fail. That was the crux of Bill Simpson's defense. On Tuesday of the week between Daytona and Rockingham, Rusty Wallace helicoptered to NASCAR's new R&D center in Conover, North Carolina, where Earnhardt's car had been taken. Both Simpson and Ken Schrader went with Wallace. Schrader had known Earnhardt for years, and Schrader knew how Earnhardt operated. He also knew that the blame game over the separated belt would be unprecedented.
This Tuesday night, we see why the seatbelt breaks. Now, you can't say that it was mounted that way because our 7-time champion that is nicknamed Ironhead insisted it friggin' be that way. And you can't say that Childress mounted that way because he did, but that's because the 7-time champion insisted. And you can't say that NASCAR just let it happen. So that's when they held that belt up and said it broke. And it's like, holy shit, you are shitting me. That's what they're going to say? Well, I understand nobody wanted to get thrown in, but now NASCAR, whether it's someone from Hendrick or Jimmy Johnson or whatever, you're going to mount that shit the way they tell you, or you ain't going on a racetrack.
Earnhardt preferred his safety harnesses longer so that they would stretch in the event of an accident. Was that a factor in the belt coming apart? All Schrader would allow was this.
But it was just mounted. It just didn't have a straight pull.
The mishap at the end of the Daytona 500 had been triggered by contact between Earnhardt Sr. and Sterling Marlin. It was a racing accident, nothing more, nothing less. But that did not stop some from going over the edge. Marlin would not specify threats made against him, other than to say that calls were made to his team's race shop in North Carolina. One incident, however, he had no problem singling out.
You'll get home and this OCC sportscaster was saying, Dale Earnhardt died from savage hit from Sterling Marlin. What the hell is he talking about? I want to call that some choose his ass out. And just an idiot. So that's kind of started. People hadn't seen the race probably thought, that's what happened,
Marlin would eventually speak to Teresa Earnhardt and Martha Earnhardt, Dale's mama. He spoke to Dale's sisters and representatives from NASCAR, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated and Richard Childress Racing. None of them blamed Marlin. One Kansas family sent flowers that were on Marlin's transporter the following week in Rockingham. They contained a pointed message. Keep your chin up. All number 3 fans are not idiots. Dale Jr. addressed the situation during his Rockingham press conference.
I do want to say that any notion or any idea that or any blame placed upon anyone, whether it be Sterling Marlin or anybody else for that matter, is ridiculous and will not be tolerated. I just think it's completely incredible that some of the things that I've heard or been told about.
The emotional lift provided by Steve Park's Rockingham victory was short-lived. The very next week, the lawsuit started. The Orlando Sentinel, Campus Communications, the publisher of the University of Florida's student newspaper, and webmaster Michael Uribe began filing motions to gain access to the photographs from Earnhardt's autopsy. Deeply distasteful at first glance, the request by the Sentinel and student newspaper could at least claim journalistic integrity in their search for the truth. Never accept at face value the official version of any event. Do the research, ask the questions. The webmaster, on the other hand, had already posted autopsy photos of both Neil Bonnet and Rodney Orr for what appeared to be nothing more than vile shock value. That was the real and present fear of the Earnhardt family, that they would one day see Dale's lifeless body splashed across newspapers, magazines, TV, and the internet. In response to the controversy and pleas from both Teresa and Dale Jr., the Florida legislature passed a law forbidding the release of autopsy photos, video, and audio without the consent of next of kin. What did happen was this. The Orlando Sentinel reached an agreement with the Earnhardts for medical expert Barry Myers to inspect the autopsy report and photographs on its behalf. The paper published Myers' findings in its April 10, 2001 edition. While Myers agreed that Earnhardt died as the result of a basal skull fracture, his report contained a most dramatic opinion. In plain English, it was Dr. Myers' opinion that the broken seatbelt was not a factor in Earnhardt's death. Just 3 days after Myers' story ran in the Orlando Sentinel, Bill Simpson made waves when he told ESPN Radio's Jack Root that he had been contacted by a fan who had video that appeared to show an EMT cutting Earnhardt's belt. For the first time in public, Simpson was claiming that his company's belt had not failed in any way, regardless of how it was installed. That particular story seemed to come and go with barely a whimper. But never fear, another was waiting in the wings that would shake the NASCAR community to its very foundations. In the April 29, 2001 edition of the Orlando Sentinel, then 49-year-old Vietnam veteran and longtime firefighter and emergency medical technician Tommy Probst claimed that Earnhardt's belt was intact when he reached in the car to assist the driver. Earnhardt and Probst were both born and raised in Kannapolis, North Carolina. Incredibly, they were first-grade classmates until Probst's family moved to Orlando in 1958. From that point on, there seemed to be new conspiracy theories about the belt, Earnhardt, and NASCAR in every nook and cranny of the sport and on every grassy knoll. This was the stuff of JFK, Lee Harvey Oswald, the Cubans, the Mafia, and LBJ. Here's Gary Nelson on what it was like to live through the aftermath of the Probst story.
It was like the current is so strong, and I'm not a strong enough swimmer to get where we need to get, but I'm going to keep swimming. And they just keep pushing me back. But I think I made a statement somewhere in there that truth will prevail. I know what I saw.
Bill Simpson was caught up in the very same tidal wave.
I had a son of a bitch come by my house in Lake Norman and shot my house up with about 16 bullets. I met Mickey and Mooch as they tried to burn my fucking truck down. You know, it created a real lot of issues, and it wasn't necessary. It was a racing accident, period.
Simpson would ultimately submit his letter of resignation to the company he founded in mid-July, and it was accepted July 30th. The strain of dealing with so much from so many directions simply got to be too much.
You know what? I was under so much stress when all that happened, and then when all that blame fell on our company, that I got in my boat and went out in the ocean and went actually from where my home is in Mexico out down to Panama, where I didn't talk to nobody. And I didn't really know nothing what was going on. All I knew was there was a whole lot of shit happening in the Carolinas.
Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s win that summer at Daytona was one of the most cathartic events in NASCAR history. But not even that could escape the stench of controversy. Several newspaper columnists had a field day. Martin Finley of the Tampa Tribune questioned the wink-wink, nod-nod aspects of the result. And then there was Jimmy Spencer, who'd been and would be no stranger to controversy. Spencer began the 2001 season with a diatribe in which he ripped Dale Sr. for skipping the popular Winston Cup preview in Winston-Salem, North Carolina that was hosted every year by series sponsor R.J. Reynolds. Said Spencer, "That son of a bitch got more money than anybody in this room, all 50 of us put together. But how did that bastard get it all? He got it through Winston and NASCAR. He's got to remember who the hell got him what he is." That's what I'm getting at. It was frickin' T. Wayne fighting for his ass and Junior Johnson and everybody else. Now he's got his frickin' Lear and everything else, and he thinks he's better than everybody else. Well, he ain't. He ain't no different than me. The man known as Mr. Excitement then doubled down in July when he openly questioned Dale Jr.'s Daytona victory. I knew going in the number 8 car was going to win this race. Something was fictitious. It's not ironic the number 8 car would win it all. Bottom line, it was impossible to keep track of the disputes that were taking place on a daily, if not hourly, basis. Meanwhile, the accident investigation continued. NASCAR was already working with Dean Sicking in the wake of the losses the year before, so he would be its barrier expert. James Radden was an Air Force surgeon who had a PhD in biomechanical engineering, and his area of expertise was what a body experienced in a high-G impact. John Melvin had been a crash safety expert at General Motors before his 1998 retirement. Gary Nelson met with the group weekly in Washington, D.C. Drivers, car owners, and crew chiefs came to Nelson in the garage area with ideas. For-profit companies pitched innovations. Well-wishers, up to and including average fans looking on from the grandstands, had concepts they were sure would help. Speculation about what NASCAR might determine ran rampant. On August 10th, 2001, the lead front page above the fold story in the Orlando Sentinel was a story by veteran NASCAR reporter Ed Helton, in which he cited what he called reliable sources close to the investigation. NASCAR's first finding, supposedly.
NASCAR race cars built by individual racing teams and inspected by NASCAR lack sufficient crush resistance in the front ends to adequately protect drivers from the severity of crashes. Redesigning probably will be recommended, with energy-absorbent bumpers in the aluminum foam crush box currently under development.
Basically, Helton had gotten the scoop on what would come to be known as the car tomorrow, a machine that certainly created great controversy of its own in years to come. But it was not the focus of the Earnhardt report that was released in an elaborate press conference held in Charlotte on August 21st. The second finding.
Earnhardt's fatal basal skull fracture will not be blamed on a broken seatbelt.
The Earnhardt report seemed careful not to single out the torn belt as the sole cause of the legend's death, but did devote an entire section to the issue, listing its evidence point by point. Finally, the third finding from Helton's source.
Emergency medical technician Tommy Probst might have incorrectly concluded that Earnhardt's lap belt was intact when he arrived at the crash scene.
NASCAR had always maintained that Earnhardt's left lap belt had been broken at some point during the accident, so reporting that the investigation would conclude that Probst was mistaken wasn't exactly a major revelation. Given the ferocity of the Sentinel's reporting, it's not hard to imagine that somebody, somewhere, intentionally gave Helton bad information. When the Earnhardt report was released, Bill Simpson released a statement. We are dismayed and disappointed that NASCAR's report leaves open the question of whether the belt separation caused Dale Earnhardt's injuries, but failed to mention that the installation did not conform to the manufacturer's specifications, which are enclosed with each safety restraint system. The same day as the NASCAR press conference, Simpson held his own alongside Charles Manning of Accident Reconstruction Analysis Incorporated and attorneys James Voles and Bob Horn. Where NASCAR's press conference was elaborate, Simpson's was anything but. The four men sat shoulder to shoulder at an 8-foot round folding table, huddled there with a cluster of reporters. The setting screamed David versus Goliath. According to Manning, Earnhardt's belts were mounted some 8.5 inches behind where Simpson's manufacturer's instructions said they should. That's what led to the dumping issue, and that's what led to the separated belt. Until the morning of September the 11th, 2001, Dale Earnhardt was all that had really seemed to matter in the NASCAR world that year. That afternoon, nothing mattered, not even Earnhardt. Attacks on New York and Washington, D.C. brought the world to a standstill. The following weekend's race at New Hampshire was postponed until the day after Thanksgiving. Of course, it had to be at New Hampshire. A year removed from Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin, and Tony Roper. Months after Dale Earnhardt, a little more than 3 weeks following the events of 9/11, one more tragedy remained in the year 2001. Join us next time on Firestorm, 2000, 2001, the years that forever changed NASCAR, for Episode 9, Blaze Alexander.